In Not For Broadcast, you are a TV news broadcast director tangling with difficult moral choices against a backdrop of political drama and fabulous absurdist humour. All the while, you have to make sure that the show goes on by successfully multitasking minigames. Not For Broadcast is a very political game, so if thinking about politics and how it shapes society doesn't do it for you, then steer clear. The game begins with an imagined political party, Advance, winning more than 80% of the popular vote. Their first message is that things are about to change in a big way. It sounds like an optimistic promise, but comes across more like a threat. In their inaugural speech, they announce that, like bureaucratic Robin Hoods, their first act will be to take money from the rich to redistribute it to the poor. And then they will take the passports from the rich to prevent them from fleeing the country before their wealth and assets have been seized. I smell something like a communist revolution, and you can ask Cambodia how well that went. This is a political dystopian drama that takes place in a parallel universe 1980s Britain. Much like George Orwell's Oceania, it's an imagined territory that exists outside of our current time and space, but is actually not very far away at all. There's even a whole thing about the COVID lockdown, albeit in an entirely different context, that brings all of this closer to home. Not For Broadcast resists lazy pigeonholing. You never quite know where it's going, and it's never easy to know who to sympathise with. It doesn't simply pit conservatives against liberals and say one of them is right. Nor does it point fingers at bad guys or lionize the good guys. Everyone is complicit in some way. The Advance Party initially appears to be helping the working class, but we all know the final destination of the road of good intentions. Likewise, the resistance movement that foments in the wake of Advance seems like the good guy underdogs at first, but they also come across as unorganized clowns, led by an incompetent idiot, whose tactics force you to question whether or not they're a better alternative to Advance. If anything, Not For Broadcast reserves its most critical judgment for journalism. One of the lead characters, news anchor Jeremy Donaldson, aspires to be a real journalist, shining a harsh light on corruption and grift, but he more often than not spends his time contemptuously rolling his eyes as he hosts yet another vacuous interview segment. He wants the news to be insightful and informative, but what he ends up pushing is a bunch of soft news drivel and mindless entertainment gossip. The game seems to suggest that the news can and should be better, and that without this intentionality, it risks simply becoming a propaganda arm of the government. If all this political stuff sounds more akin to a super dry college-level poli-sci class, then fret not. Not For Broadcast is top-notch funny, with copious quantities of laugh-out-loud greatness. Especially if you're into that particular blend of dry wit and absurdist humour that the British seem to do so well. The actors nail every single scene with well-timed acerbic one-liners or bloodletting, scornful looks. There's Python-esque slapstick and plenty of hilarious interview segments and off-camera dialogue that is written so well it helps make the characters and their motivations real. The adverts are outrageous parodies that go straight for the jugular of shallow consumer culture and the corrupt predators trying to make a buck off it. There's even a bizarre, surreal fever dream segment where you're attacked by killer toys. No one is spared the skewering. The cult of celebrity, unscrupulous corporate behaviour, child pop stars, all of them and more are ruthlessly satirised. In fact, Not For Broadcast fires numerous broadsides against the generally vacuous pop culture atmosphere which we all consume without question. It's also critical of the mass media, which is guilty of thoughtlessly peddling this garbage for money. Not For Broadcast suggests that this is a nightmare version of reality, not far removed from our own. All we have to do to make it come true is not pay attention. Just keep on living a steady diet of garbage television, and you permit these power shifts to happen without even realizing. At first seemingly benign, and then suddenly very disastrous. The consequences of our inattention scale fast, once the dominoes of our consent start to fall. And it's within this model that you're forced to make difficult choices. Much like the agonizing options in Frostpunk or This War of Mine, making any choice comes with both sometimes clear and sometimes obfuscated benefits and downsides. All the decisions are grey, as is the morality on which the game lives. No one is entirely right or wrong, and everyone seems to be just trying to live their lives and do the right thing. In the end, this is a tragedy of our collective creation. So where do you fit within this framework? You play as a behind-the-scenes director. Your job is to make sure the public broadcast runs smoothly, and you do this from behind a relatively simple console. Gameplay ends up being a series of minigames, but before you scream, they're actually pretty great. Or at least they're simple enough so as not to inspire rage quits. There's a lot of juggling and multitasking. One minute you're making sure the camera cuts to the current speaker, The next you're dealing with a bad station signal, and then you're scrambling to censor swear words before they make it to the live feed. There's even a camera cut music rhythm game. It's hectic and requires dedicated attention. In other words, it's a challenge, and one that's pretty much unlike anything I've seen before in a video game. I feel genuinely exhausted by the end of a broadcast from all the concentration and fine motor skills I've been employing. But it's also hugely rewarding for the most part. Unfortunately, there are a couple of segments toward the end of the game where it feels mostly like filler. Not much happens plot-wise, and the minigames feel like a drag. I fell into roles that seemed obvious to me. On my first playthrough, I was a rules follower, kowtowing to both the ruling advance party, as well as the wishes of the station manager. I dutifully censored bad language. I played advertisements that would help the party drive home their messages. When the station manager asked me to cut to the advert instead of allowing sensitive broadcast material to air, I obediently licked the boot. This came at the expense of my home and family life, but I did end up quite well off. There are 16 different epilogues to unlock, depending on your choices, so replayability is massive. And if you're a completionist type, this game will keep you company for quite some time to come. Choices come at you thick and fast. There are interstitial segments that read like a choose-your-own-adventure novel. You have all the time in the world to make well-considered choices about how your life will pivot, or not. Then there are subtle choices that you make on the fly while on the job. Many choices revolve around whether you choose to portray one or another party in a positive or negative light. Do you implicitly support the resistance movement by portraying them as heroic freedom fighters, or undermine their efforts by picking the photo that depicts them as clowns? There are hot-seat, frantic decisions made during intense dramatic moments when the clock is ticking that could derail the rest of the game. Some decisions have immediate and obvious repercussions, while others play out over the course of the entire game. But crucially, your decision-making role in the consequences is always made clear. There's a whole metric system for keeping track of the various factions in the game, and how your decisions have impacted their standing in the public sphere. This is displayed in a thematically brilliant way through a rudimentary teletext graphic, something that would only make sense if you grew up watching television in the 80s and 90s. On the practical side, I experienced frequent and frustrating hard crashes that I couldn't problem solve. I was still able to complete the game, but the instability was annoying as hell. The game was going for $24.99 at the time of this review, and despite that one bad crash bug, I can't imagine a better way to spend my time and money. I'm already looking forward to another playthrough, where I'll tease out different choices and see where they lead. This is a fiercely original gameplay concept that is mostly very well executed. The rare example of a game that's both quite funny and actually kind of thought-provoking. It actually lives up to the claim of being an interactive experience with meaningful choices and a huge amount of replayability. Whether or not you enjoy Not For Broadcast will depend a lot on whether you're on board with the direction that their odd, goofy brand of comedy takes the game. So I recommend you play the free demo, Not For Broadcast Prologue, and see if it brings out a guffaw or two before you part with your hard-earned cash.